Welcome to the show. I am your host, Bryan Lee Whatley. Our story begins tonight with a very special guest, PTSD and survivor's guilt author, Dr. Phil Bralich. Dr. Bralich has a PhD in linguistics. He spent many years teaching ESL and essay and research writing, and he is motivated by the tragic accident that took his wife's life and much of the use of his left leg. The memoir Blaming Jeffrey Ryder describes a 30-year journey through Western and Eastern psychology, including much reading, practice, and much loved run-in with the world of the beats. After having been laid off once again from the best job of his life, he decided to take his meager savings and resolve his difficulties once and for all. The PTSD and survivor's guilt from his accident were finally resolved through this effort, and his studies and travels began in the Peace Corps in West Africa, and moved through years in Hawaii, 2 years in Japan, and approximately 2 years in group meditation and retreats in many Buddhist centers across North America. Now, PTSD and survivor's guilt is a very serious subject, but I believe you will find Phil's story and inspiration on how to overcome difficult and traumatic times in your life. Our musical guest tonight is Michelle Murray with her inspirational song, It Won't Be If, But When. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Welcome, Phil. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you doing? Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks. I'm doing pretty good. It's nice and sunny today. I think it was one of the days it didn't actually rain out here. So I was pretty happy about that. But I had so much work else I had to do. I didn't get a chance to get outside and enjoy the weather. So hopefully you did where you are.
Well, my career, it's always foggy and cool. Never cold, never hot. It's always foggy and cool. We're kind of used to it.
Is it fog or smog? Because I heard Monterey was pretty clean.
It's fog, actually. It's on a big bay, and a lot of fog rolls in from the mountain into the bay.
Okay. That must be very surreal. I can imagine just meditating out there. I love getting out by the water. So before we get into, you've got this amazing book that's out there called Blaming Jeffrey Ryder, or Jeffrey Ryder, Memoir of Dharma Bum Who Survived. Before we get into all that, I'd love for you to just take a quick moment and just give our listeners a little bit of overview about you and your work.
Well, basically, I was a pretty ordinary lower middle class American in the 70s, and got married. My late wife and I we joined the Peace Corps, and we were just we were kind of draft protesters, but we were very American, so we felt we had to do something to make up for it. And we found the Peace Corps to be a good place to both serve and to still be a liberal. And so we joined there. In the Peace Corps, though, this tragic accident occurred that changed, and my wife died, and it changed, my life ever since then. And it actually motivated the book that I'm writing, which gave me an opportunity to, explore and discuss and now write this book about PTSD and why it is that some people get it and some people don't, and what it is exactly, why it's so poorly understood, and why everybody thinks people are just kind of faking, or that there's something that they just can't drop it for some reason. And so I went through all those. It's a very tragic accident. Again, just an ordinary 26-year-old couple joined the Peace Corps, and then this life that developed after the death of my wife and my accident, and 30 years from there as I try to explore and understand the whole thing. And in that, I spent a lot of years doing Zen and reading Christian mysticism and Western psychology, Freud and Jung, and did a lot of Tibetan Buddhism as well. And all of this just trying to understand why the realities of PTSD and the tremendous harassment of it just doesn't stop.
So that's kind of... Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and it's the PTSD is not just for medical people. It's just for war victims. They call it. We used to call it shock. Not everybody calls it PTSD. But it's for victims of crime, victims of abuse, medical aren't victims, but there's PTSD for medical things as well. And the reality of it, the experience that people actually have, is that in the sort of the surface, the front, they can behave relatively normal. They're frozen, and they seem emotionless. And in the background, though, is a kind of craziness that's building up. Because of the PTSD, they can't really interact with and metabolize ordinary ups and downs of daily life. Everything is trapped on the original traumas, and they can't metabolize ordinary things. Everything is blocked somehow around that accident. So what, the angels and demons that anybody has, for most people, they just deal with them on a daily, weekly basis and don't worry about it too much. For a schizophrenic, they're completely lost in it. For someone with PTSD, they look perfectly normal, but in the background, it's almost like a schizophrenic because he can't bring things forward and relate to it in an ordinary way. They need dramatic psychological interventions, dream work, regular therapy, and that sort of thing, to allow the angels, demons of daily life back up into normal life and then metabolize them. You stay with the angels and you get away from the devil. And so a person with PTSD, this could be a Vietnam vet or a vet from the Middle East, victims of abuse, victims of this, victims of that. But the reality is, on the surface, they look and sound just fine. They don't chat very much. They seem kind of frozen. They stare a lot. But other than that, it seems just fine. And everybody just says, oh, just drop it. That's all you need to do. All you need to do is just drop it. What people don't see is that in the background, the entirety of everything else is cooking. And so there's always the danger of a repetition of the original trauma breaking out. And if you look at Rambo movie, for me, Rambo is a very good example of how PTSD works. On the surface, Rambo looks just fine. Looks like somebody who could just, go off, get a job, work his way up the ladder, and become, a nice family man with no problems whatsoever. No matter what his Vietnam background was, he looks like he could just do that. But in the background, things are cooking. And the fact that his PTSD prevents him from relating in an ordinary way to his angels and demons makes him this tinderbox. So that, and again, this is true for medical and for abuse. So kind of a tinderbox, and what's the danger is that this can break out. And there are cruel people out there who might think it's just sort of entertaining to make a PTSD victim's original trauma break out again. What happens with Rambo is somebody drew first blood, and all of a sudden he tears up the whole city like he's back in Vietnam. And in my case, the PTSD, for me, it was a nice young couple in the Peace Corps, living a life, looking for a future, thinking about kids, all this sort of thing. And out of nowhere, this accident came, and I lost my wife, my job, my house, basically all my stuff. Only a couple of duffel bags came to the hospital with me in Germany. And this, for me, is what repeats. For Rambo, what repeats is the Vietnam warrior. For me, what repeats is the Peace Corps volunteer losing everything. So through the course of my career, and through the course of my life, for the whole 30-some years now, I'm constantly watching out for a repetition of that original trauma. And it's happened lots of times. I lose my job, I lose my girlfriend, I lose my friends, and I lose, it's just everything out of nowhere. And it parallels very clearly, and it feels just like the original trauma. So for me, I lose everything. For Rambo, he's back in Vietnam. The original source is repeated. And this is the real story. So in my search, it's not because I was lazy or because I'm making excuses or I just want to hang around a psychologist's couch. It was because of these repetitions. I had to keep working at it. I had to keep studying. I had to keep trying because I just don't want to keep losing everything every time PTSD turns from the frozen, quiet guy into the repetition of the trauma. And I'm doing Zen Buddhism, I'm reading psychology, I'm reading Eastern philosophy, doing meditation, seeing psychologists off and on. And through the whole story, little by little, over as much as 30 years, I begin to get a sense of how to work with it and sort of And at first, you don't get the trauma still repeats, but it begins to repeat less and less. Instead of a downward spiral of losing everything where you absolutely lose everything, you begin to lose everything, but somewhat lighter. You know, big fights with your girlfriend or temporary breakups, or your friends are all angry at you, and it just looks like exactly the same thing happening all over again. And within all this, and you see this on television all the time with police victims and vets and so forth. And you can think about your grandfather in World War II or the Vietnam vet you knew, or so forth. They don't talk about their traumas. And this is something that I think, and I think in other ways too, I can make contributions to the understanding of PTSD, but this is the real danger. They say just talk about it, talk to your shrink about it, talk to your girlfriend about it, talk to somebody about it. But the reality is, talking about it and not talking about it are both dangerous. And the danger is it's going to repeat. Danger for Rambo is he's going to tear up a whole city. The danger for me is I'm going to lose everything. And the danger for abuse victims, the abuse is going to recur. And again, talking about it in the wrong way, not talking about it too much, both can lead to repetition. And so the constant staring and the constant, what the psychologists call hypervigilance on the part of the PTSD sufferer is the result of constantly watching for the repetition. And then, making things even worse, it's also constantly watching for people who are actually kind of cruel, and they see somebody with PTSD and they want to make it repeat. It's not that they really know that so much, it's they think there's something going on they can tease them about, and their actual satisfaction comes when that repetition occurs. And they go, see, I told you so. And like with Rambo, the police were bothering Rambo. You see the guy walking on the street, everything is normal. They pester him and pester him and pester him until finally something breaks out, and then they go, see, I told you so, there's something wrong with that guy. How had they not pestered him, he would have just had his lunch and wandered off and found a job somewhere. And maybe actually became an ordinary family man who didn't have to tear up the whole town. And in my case, if this sort of this weird targeting and pestering of strangers didn't happen, my career probably would have been much more normal. I get the status by coworkers and strangers. You go to the grocery store, and victims of PTSD very, very quickly say, yes, we know what you're talking about. You go to the grocery store, and you're harassed for no clear reason. And so you're constantly watching. You're watching for repetition of trauma. You're watching for harassment that may cause it to recur. And you're watching yourself, so you don't talk about it too much or talk about it too little. And in the long run, you look very normal. And you're convinced yourself you're very normal. You know that what's going on in the background is absolutely quite schizophrenic, but you know you can handle it. It's constantly growing in the background rather than the angels and demons being metabolized on a daily, weekly basis in an ordinary way. And so the danger of people losing their whole lives, becoming re-abused, the vet's training breaking out a second time, and not just training, it's experience breaking out a second time in downtown, ordinary town, Iowa. These are the real dangers that they're watching for. And at the same time, you're watching for this, you're also working on trying to calm it down, metabolize, get the repetitions to stop, get the angels and demons to come up in an ordinary way and relate to them just like anybody else. And this, I think, is why PTSD is being dismissed, and at the same time, why it's extremely important that the U.S. military and psychologists, psychiatrists, and so forth take it very seriously. Because people are ending up, some homeless are just lazy, of course. Some of them are just alcoholics or drug addicts. But some of them have PTSD, and what's repeating is the inability to get off the street. Getting onto the street was a trauma in the first place, and I'm trying to step up again. It repeats. They want to talk about it, they don't want to talk about it. And again, this whole dynamic keeps repeating. So I think one of the things I bring people's attention to is how important it is to treat PTSD and understand PTSD as completely and thoroughly as possible.
Mm.
And that would be a very positive contribution to the culture. The undeserving homeless, the vet who's sick, the victims of abuse, and so forth. All these people could get much better, much more productive lives, which of course would benefit everyone.
Right.
And now, if I'm getting too long-winded, just let me know.
Oh, it's quite all right. That's why it's so great about it being a talk show. Now, is your background in psychology, or because you have a PhD, correct?
Yes, my PhD is in linguistics, and that's sort of a career that I managed to maintain. And you could actually tell this without a PTSD victim. You can't hardly talk to people in general, but if you have the teacher's spot, the lecturer's spot, you can be pretty good at what you do.
Right.
Having a chat with your coworkers doesn't work very well. They think you're cold, they think you're frozen, they think you're unemotional. But in front of the classroom, you can kind of be yourself. And for me, I got a BA, Master's, and PhD in theoretical linguistics, which became a career in foreign language learning. And I taught ESL in Japan. I was my little wife and I were ESL teachers originally in Africa, and I picked it up again. And I taught in Japan for a couple of years. I taught in Hawaii for a bunch of years. And again, through this, it's repeating. I can't get a decent job. When I get a decent job, everything blows up and falls apart around the PTSD, and in a very parallel manner to that original accident.
Mm.
And then, and one of my favorite jobs, probably the best job I ever had, was as a professor at the Defense Language Institute. It's a very well-known language school for the Army.
Right.
And where they take all these military kids and who need to learn a language, they put them all in this one center. Well, there's actually several centers, but there's the main center and the famous one. And they go through and they learn a language.
Right.
And I was there teaching how to learn a foreign language. And the job was very interesting. I have no military background, a very poor understanding of military discipline. But honestly, I think they kind of like that. They don't like, civilians messing in their business. And my total lack of understanding, I think they found comfortable. I'm not sure, but I think overall they just found it comfortable.
Yeah, definitely. I'm former military. I had 14 years, and I got out after Iraq, so I definitely understand on how we look at civilians when they come into a military site or something like that. We like for them to be civilians and for us to be military, and there's a fine line that you try for each not to cross. So I definitely understand that.
The closest I got to military discipline was just referring everything to my boss, who was a military guy. And then he would talk to me and said, he thought I should be modify what I was doing in the classroom. He'd tell me, and I didn't see any reason to oppose him. He's military,
Right. Now, DLI, the Defense Language Institute, I had a couple of friends who went there. We separated schools. I was combat military police and did explosive ordnance and stuff like that. And other guys left to go to military intelligence, and that's where they went to go learn languages. And they all said that while it was extremely tough, but they really enjoyed it. Something about, and is there like a lockdown or something that, like within the first month or something, you're there and you learn nothing? You don't speak the English language. You don't,
Well, there's this 2-week program, and that's what my main job was, where you teach them how to learn a foreign language. So you refresh their English grammar skills, and that's 4 hours a day for 2 weeks. And then that's just their mornings. And the afternoons, you teach them foreign language learning. And there are all kinds of tricks and twists and turns and confidence builders that you build into this 2-week course. And so those of us in this, it's called the Smart Start program, those of us in that program would watch, or we would teach for that 2 weeks, and we got to see everybody, Marines, Navy, mostly young kids.
Right.
And you'd see an occasional sergeant or an officer come through learning a language, but mostly it was a bunch of kids. And for a teacher in this age, teaching for the military is very, very refreshing. Every classroom, every big classroom, for this program, had a sergeant. And you don't have to think about discipline even for a second. If things are slightly off, you know the sergeant has it before you even half notice it. You know, so you don't think about that at all. You just teach the class, and it's very rewarding for the teacher, and it really allows you to power pack the class and give the students what they need. And, you know, and they have the good sense to respect their sergeants and not make trouble. So it's very, you know, I've taught a lot of non-native speakers. I've taught American civilians, and the discipline and the maintenance of classroom boundaries and so forth takes up a lot of your time and takes up a lot of your focus on getting the job done. Working for DLI, you can get the job done. And that I found very, very rewarding.
Right. It was always interesting to me, the languages that they got to pick. There was like 2 or 3 of them, or 2 of them, and then they got a third one if they couldn't get the first 2 or something. But they all said that they pretty much had a good time. And from what I understand, people who go there really do learn the language. So I think that's pretty cool that you actually taught there. And I got a chance to speak to one of the instructors because I've always wondered about the school and wanted to go there, but I just never signed up for it. So that's pretty cool. But
and that 2-week program was only part of what we did. We also did advising and seminars and workshops for remediation. And the thing is, it's very expensive to put a student or I don't know, what do you call them, students or kids or whatnot, but a military kid through that program. And so it was a very high priority on reducing the failure rate. And so people who are beginning to have trouble, they send them up to advising, kind of sharpen up their skills a little bit, talk about the problems they're having. Again, only on foreign language learning. We're not technologists anyway.
Right.
And they're all quite clear about that. And then workshops and seminars to remediate, to make sure they're on top of their game from the point of view of, focusing on that language.
Right.
There's some cultural things, too. There are cultural problems, which are handled very differently by the military, I suspect. I don't really know. But we would talk about ordinary cross-cultural relations between Arabics and Americans, French and Americans, Africans and Americans, and so forth. Just talk about cultural relations from an everyday point of view. And that would often help them get along with their teachers, which can actually be a major problem there, because some of these cultures are very, very different. And they're grateful for these nice jobs, but they're not very interested in culturating. They're being, the Saudi Arabian guy, or they're being the Iraqi guy, or they're being the French guy. They don't compromise very much on that. And some of the younger kids get in trouble because they wrestle up against it,
Right. Now, with having, because you were talking about PTSD, and I want to get back to that, but from the military standpoint on it, I think you mentioned something that's very important from the military, like Rambo himself, or even so many people that are coming out of Iraq and Afghanistan and some of the other hotspots around the world. But it's not just military people who suffer this, and that's huge for everybody to understand, is that anybody can actually suffer PTSD. We think of it as, a lot of times it's just military, but it's any major tragic event, such as, those involved in 9/11. And even if you weren't on ground zero during that time, a lot of people, I've heard, just the horror and everything that happened, the shock value that happened during 9/11 has caused a lot of people to have PTSD. And it's so important for people to understand that anybody can be affected, whether it's a car accident or whether it's a death in the family or something else, that it isn't just subject to the military. But there's something you mentioned earlier as well, is that people will pick on somebody that has PTSD, like there's a symptom about that. I've never heard of that.
Well, it's one of the funniest things. There are websites out right now called Mobbing and Bullying, and it seems that PTSD seems to inspire a subtle kind of bullying and mobbing. It's like in my high school biology class, there was an experiment where you had a group of chicks in a cage, and you painted a blue stripe on one, and they all picked on all the other chicks picked on that chick, on blue stripe, the pecking order.
Right.
And it's somehow the PTSD marks you in some kind of a pecking order, and people they see that you're frozen, you seem unemotional, and they think you're up to something, or they think you did something, or whatnot, and they start picking on you. And again, you could just laugh it off and say, well, they're immature, what can I do? But the thing is, it's constant and persistent. It seems to be a basis of a lot of bullying and mobbing that goes on in schools and the workplace. And it really interferes with a person's ability to have a normal social life and a normal career. And far worse than that is it can trigger a PTSD reaction. And you don't want to trigger a Rambo. And, there are Vietnam vets who stay out of towns and stay living off in the jungle of Hawaii. I mean, that was years ago, but that happened. There are, and there's always this affinity, with bikers, Vietnam vets, recently returned vets, and so forth. You all kind of notice each other, and you say, you don't talk that much, you don't even necessarily meet, but you just kind of see each other across the room, and you have this, ships passing in the night kind of recognition.
Yeah, you kind of give each other
and you're supportive of each other, and nobody really kind of knows what that's all about. It's like the biker knows me, you kind of look and say, well, he's biker enough, I'm not going to bother him. And if vet looks at me and says, well, I don't know, he's human enough, I'm not going to bother him, he's not going to bother me. And you have this kind of recognition going on. But also there's a recognition of this subtle form of pestering that comes from, the ordinary citizen who's, jealous or thinks you're a criminal or thinks you're a biker. And I think Vietnam vets and British tragedy might be confused with bikers or vets or something else. So, with pestering, and I talk about it a good bit in the book, and where it comes from and what it is. But it's subtle, but ever present. And when you start to react to it, people will call the vet or the PTSD victim paranoid. There's nothing going on. Nobody's doing anything. But actually, there's this kind of pestering going on, and it's kind of poking buttons. And you reasonably wonder, is it me? Is it the PTSD? Am I paranoid? Or is it the crowds? Are people really doing this? And I think it's, of course, with anything, it's a combination of all that, but it's not being properly addressed, and the PTSD victims don't have sufficient skills to, which is most important, is to dismiss it or to wave it away. And somehow, again, like being the chick with the blue mark, you're the center of the pecking order of this weird dynamic.
Wow, see, that's interesting, because I've never heard of something like that happening. And being a war veteran myself and being in the military for a while, and I've got friends. I actually one of my best friends, who my son is actually named after, he was killed over in Iraq, and I can't imagine somebody actually picking on somebody with PTSD. I hate bullying to begin with. I was always against bullying, even through grade school and high school and whatnot. I can't stand it. But to find out that somebody's actually bullying somebody with PTSD, whether it's a military person or whether it's anybody that's gone through some kind of tragic event in their life, really aggravates the heck out of me. And I can't believe that people would actually go around and do that. Let alone if you start bullying. Oh man, I'm starting to get on the soapbox now. But I didn't realize we were about to go here, but I'm just going to go here. If you start bullying a military vet that has PTSD, you're in a world of hurt. And I'm just saying that because, like Rambo's situation, and I'll be honest, when I came back from Iraq, and I had to come back under some pretty extreme circumstances, I couldn't watch some movies. Watching Rambo, I couldn't even watch. There were some, even any kind of cop movies or things that had gunfire and things like that, I couldn't watch. And so I'm a little bit better about it now. So I completely understand the whole head nod thing and recognition of it for people who went through some kind of tragic event. And again, it's not just military; it's anybody who suffered it. But to find out that there's people that would exploit the feelings that somebody who's suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and for their own satisfaction, for their own sense of humor, that just makes me want to just put their face in the cement. I'm sorry. And I'm a nice, peaceful person, and everybody that knows me knows that I am, but I can't believe somebody's going to bully somebody with PTSD. I've never heard of that before. Wow.
Well, and that's a growing exploration in the field of PTSD, and it's coming from the workplace, from school bullying and workplace bullying, and making an association between that and PTSD. There's a website right now called bullyonline.org, and it's a discussion group and a website, all kinds of things, and they have a lot of very convincing, relatively casual papers on the connection between PTSD, mobbing, and bullying, and how some managers and teachers even would use this pecking order as the basis for decision making about promotions and layoffs. So that the PTSD victim, is always the first one to be missed for a promotion or to be laid off.
Now, was this known from the manager that the person had PTSD? Was it did the person come out and say, okay, I need to tell you something in private, and went to HR and told the manager, hey, I've got PTSD, I just wanted to let you know, kind of a thing, and then they turned around and laid them off and fired them? Is that what you're saying?
No, it's not that conscious. It's like chicks. Chicks don't know that it's just a blue streak, and then when chicks back, they're beating them up out of a kind of instinct. And I think for these managers and so forth, they may not know that the person has PTSD or what PTSD is, and even if you told them, he wouldn't necessarily understand it if he wasn't all that psychologically minded. But again, this is kind of what happens. I think a lot of vets and a lot of any PTSD victim will recognize that they're being ignored and passed over and laid off from this odd dynamic. And this website, bullyonline.org, talks about it a lot. And it's very nice to describe there, and it's very convincing. You read through that. But still, there's always this question, to people who are in this position: is it just me? Why can't I just beat this? Why can't I just be like everybody else and not be the chick with the blue stripe? What is going on, and why are these people not sensitive enough to their world to recognize they're just picking on someone? They're not finding an incompetent or a crazy. They're only finding PTSD. And so I do think the managers and so forth, in some cases, are actually aware of it and are willing to use it because they know it will work. But in most cases, I think they are unconscious of it, and just kind of some sort of targeting instinct takes over and end up being a bully or a mobber.
Wow. I gotta say, I gotta center myself now. I need to meditate for a second. Hold on, let me regroup. Wow, I cannot. Oh my goodness. If this was a live show right now, I'd be honest with you. I think our phone lines would be ringing off the hook. This is completely new to me. I've never heard of anything like this. So, now how does this? Let's go into your book, Blaming Jeffrey Ryder, Memoir of a Delmar Bum Who Survived. Let's talk about your book a little bit.
So it's actually kind of an adventure built into it. It's not just this dry story of psychology. There was the accident. I spent 4.5 months in the hospital, 3 years on crutches, constantly cramping to death of my wife, and not knowing how to uncramp it and wanting to. And then the psychological exploration began. And I just found myself meeting a lot of beatniks and hippies and New Agers, and I'm sort of in this world that really is not, middle-class America. There's a lot of middle-class people there, but it was a very, very different world. I'm going to Zen centers, and I'm going to Tibetan centers, and reading Jung and Freud, all these things which I never really expected to do at all, because I was just sort of, an intellectual kid who wanted to study linguistics. And I meet the business. I met Allen Ginsberg, a very well-known one. I know a lot about Jack Kerouac. I met some of Jack Kerouac's contemporaries and friends. And I met a bunch of Tibetan gurus, famous ones. I was 2 feet from the Dalai Lama. I saw a lecture by a guy called Karmapa, a very famous Tibetan teacher. And I saw lots and lots of the lesser-known ones in centers in Berkeley, Vermont, Colorado, California, Hawaii even. And so I got a very, very wide experience and kind of an adventure with the beatniks, the hippies, New Age, and so forth. And that also colors the perspective in my book, where I see an awful lot of very interesting psychological strategies and philosophies for PTSD and many other things. But at the same time, there are very severe problems. And again, confusions of cultures. So there's Hindu culture and Indian culture, Tibetan culture, Chinese culture, and a lot of the cultural battles they've lived for centuries are being worked out on American soil in some cases. Americans totally foreign to this. The druggies and the spiritual seekers of the 70s are turning up at all these centers. They don't even notice sometimes that the Tibetans can hardly understand the word they say. The Indians, the Indian guru types, they understand English very, very well, but they often don't understand American culture at all. The Japanese probably have the best understanding and are most simpatico with American culture, but again, most Americans and most Japanese don't really understand each other. I knew that during this same thing, I met a guy in his 70s, a Japanese guy, who was Japanese national, but he had lived in Canada for 14 years working for an airline. And one time I just met you sort of casually, wouldn't it be nice if cultures would just get along? And he said, well, not really, because what really happens early on is that people take the easiest and most trivial things from both cultures and think they understand the whole culture. So Japanese will take superficial understandings of individualism and Americanism and so forth, and Americans will take superficial views of martial arts and Zen and whatnot and get it all wrong and make a huge mess. And so well, it would be nice to get along, and the Indians and Tibetans and the Japanese and everybody, but the understanding simply isn't there, and the first meeting of these cultures is very, very superficial. And I saw a lot of people get in trouble, very serious trouble, with the misunderstandings of Tibetans and Japanese and Indians and gurus and all these different sorts of people. They became very, very confused.
And so your research into this, the memoir describes a 30-year journey through all this Western Eastern psychology. And this was brought on by the accident that you had in West Africa that took your wife and your leg?
Yes, and I do point that out a lot. That, my commitment to these things was always kind of tentative because the main search was a search to get back to normal. It wasn't that I wanted to be a guru. I didn't want to be, to give up Western culture or whatnot. It's just I wasn't getting it from the Freud and the Jung, and I wasn't getting it from the couch, and I wasn't getting it from the meditation, so I just kept looking and looking and looking. And then part of it, I am smart and very intellectual, so I thought it,
Right.
kind of motivated and entertained me. But the fact is, I was driven to it because of the repetition. I didn't want to keep losing my girlfriend's, my job, and my social life. I wanted to have something stable and lasting. And while those things kept, and then you begin to suspect and worry that some of the repetition is coming from the effort to fix it itself. Again, when do you drop it, and when do you work on it, when do you talk about it, when do you don't, becomes as confusing as the original issues.
Right.
But it's choices. Nothing can be done for someone with PTSD. They gotta prevent the recurrences.
So do you feel that this research and your drive to finding this knowledge, has it helped?
In the long run, yes. but I had to sort through an awful lot to get to some conclusions, which is part of the reason I wrote the book. Because I could share a lot of the false starts and errors and so forth. And I've actually drawn some of my own conclusions about the nature of PTSD, the nature of bullying that PTSD sufferers have to endure, and present that in the book. And I think, I think it remains pretty readable. I mean, I have the PhD and I did some, serious publications, but my teaching experience is pretty much junior college level, and with young students, a lot of training, and non-native speakers, a lot of training. And so I think the language I use in the book is pretty much available to a lot of people. It's not a scholarly paper. It's not some Joycean exploration of literature. It's just, ordinary language.
Right. Now, I've heard a lot of people say it's just a matter of just getting their mind off of it and trying to refocus into something else. And I feel that that's basically what you did as well. And do you consider what you've done a great source for other people to try in terms of trying to overcome their situation with their PTSD? Am I right about that?
Yes.
Okay.
And what I'd like to happen more than anything, again, you can't predict, but what I'd like to happen are serious professionals in these different disciplines and in psychology to take a look and comment on it, or decide whether or not they think it's worth passing out to people who actually have these problems. I mean, and again, I'm certainly not against the cousins and the uncles and the brothers and sisters, or people who are just interested in the whole journey.
Right.
Reading it, certainly, but I wouldn't mind commentary coming from trained professionals in PTSD. Is this a contribution? I don't want to fight them. I don't want to be a rebel.
Right.
I'd rather just have a commentary from them.
Exactly. Now, the companion volume that comes with this, Blaming Jeffrey Ryder, is the email chronicles about that. How many emails are part of this, and what's so important about the emails?
Well, the emails are sort of the journal I use to keep track of all of this over this 30 years. In 1982, after I returned from my first trip to Japan, is where I started really doing the Eastern philosophy, meditation, and psychology. And the email chronicles are basically emails I wrote to different listservs and groups and so forth, and individuals that sort of chronicled my journey in some sense. As it developed, and as I met more beatniks and hippies and Tibetans, I got into writing poetry, which in many ways is not me, but so when you see the poems, don't worry too much about an intellectual challenge there. But I started writing poems in a combination of the Jack Kerouac beatnik style and the Tibetan spontaneous poetry style, as close as I could get to either. And but these experiments also the poems also helped me keep track of the whole thing. And so I've got like 30 years. I got my first email in 1986. And I started joining academic listservs and Buddhist listservs and Yahoo groups type things, even in the earliest versions, and have maintained them ever since. So rather than keeping a journal like a lot of writers, pre-computer era writers did, I just kept emails.
Nice.
And so these, and they also serve as a document. So they can help. There are people who actually cohort with me. We're friends or acquaintances, or we know each other without actually having met. And they can know their experiences too with the cultishness, the confusion, the language problems, and so forth, and the poetics, and they can keep track a little bit themselves with what was going on in their lives.
Nice. I like that. I like the fact of journaling and the fact that you used email way before email was actually popular, and it was really, really way before it was popular. So, no, that's pretty good.
Huh?
I think that's pretty good. Journaling is definitely something I think a lot of people should do for whatever reason they need to do it with. I find it fascinating that you kept emails for so long, and you used it to help track your progress, so or your journey rather. But
getting back to your original question, this last year, I've really seen things begin to break up the way that I haven't seen the whole 30 years. And I think writing the book was a big part of that. And still, it takes time for it to actually sink in. But I'm beginning to have ordinary conversations with people. I'm being less harassed. And there's a feeling of optimism that I've never really had before, that this constant need to watch, the constant need that letting go would be very, very, this feeling that letting go would be very, very dangerous, and I would just lose everything and not be able to modify it as it occurs. So as a repetition of the original trauma recurs, if I was just letting go, I wouldn't be there to modify it, and the whole world would collapse around me. And again, psychologists and Buddhists might argue and whatnot, but I think that's the real experience of the PTSD sufferer. That, you know, the letting go makes a lot of sense, and every time you try, the world falls apart. And you can't tell a psychologist, you can't tell, and they're also very leery about taking medicine. Pain pills, alcohol doesn't seem to bother them, strangely. But,
find your sorrows on the bottom of a bottle.
Yeah, and which is, of course, has its own dangers. But but the you know, they can't convince their psychologists why they won't take or why they're afraid of the pills, and they have a hard time articulating what the problem is. The families don't understand, the psychologists don't understand, but it's all about keeping the repetition from happening. You know, you don't want someone to draw first blood in the first place, and if someone does, you don't want it to be destruction of the whole town. If something recurs, you want to be there, present. You don't want to be letting go to keep it from happening.
Yeah, exactly.
And again, they might come wrong, but I think that's the experience that needs to be understood.
Exactly. Now, for some future projects you have coming up in terms of shows or other books you're working on, appearances for some book signings where people can get in contact with you, you also have this other book, come to think about it, it's called Common Sense, How to Tax the Rich.
Yeah, that's kind of a political reaction. And again, I read a lot, and I read on politics as well as psychology and philosophy. And, you know, I got laid off at DLI, and I felt that was unfair, and I felt it was coming from the civilians, not the military. And it was just one more thing, you know. And that's when I wrote the memoir. And, you know, I got angry and bitter, and out of that came the Common Sense, How to Tax the Rich, which is a current affairs book meant to address a lot of the gridlock and a lot of the problems in politics today. You know, the lack of communication, the disconnect between the left and the right, the disconnect between the rich and the poor, the middle class being the target of everything. No matter what anybody says, the middle class feels like a target of the poor and a target of the rich, and there's a lot of fighting going on. I can talk real tough, you know, like an O'Reilly or Howard Stone or something, but I prefer not to. And when I say let's tax the rich, I say I mean more. Let's get this conversation going in a way that will work for the middle class. You know, some of this just has to be cut through, and we have to get down to what works for the family of four.
Right.
And so I say tax the rich. You know, I could have said let's kill the poor or let's kill the rich, but that's just too much. You know, let's focus on the middle class and make things work for them. And that's the end of it.
Nice. Well, we'll definitely have to have you back on to talk more about that book because it sounds pretty interesting. So, but book signings and stuff like that. How can people contact you? Besides, I've got your website as blamingjaffreywriter.com, and then I'm gonna spell that out for everybody. It's BLAMINGJAPHYRIDER.com. And they can get you on Facebook for Philip Bralich. Your Google page. You have a Google page out there. Your Twitter is P. Bralich. And then they can purchase your books on that website, Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, all the ebooks. What are some other places?
Yeah, and one thing, if you just type my name, Phil Bralich, in Google, you'll find a whole bunch of stuff. That's probably you'll see the bookstores and the events and reviews, and you'll see both books, the current affairs book and the memoir. So Googling my name is probably the fastest way to get to check this out more.
Okay.
And they actually buy the book if they want to, but
well, of course.
but at least to check it out more.
Well, it's definitely an interesting approach that you took for what led you on your journey in order to study what you've studied and how to overcome situations and the enlightenment that it brought you about from your studies. And so I think it's pretty impressive to me. So
Thank you.
It's 30 years of chronologically, saving up all this stuff and working on it. That's a long time. So and everything. And I'm sorry about your wife and everything that you've gone through. So. But on behalf of everybody, well, actually, before that, do you have any final thoughts you would like for everyone to know?
Well, I guess the main thing is, if you've got a cousin or a brother or a neighbor or a husband or something or a wife who seems to be having this problem, check out my name on the website and see if you don't find some information there that might be of value.
Outstanding. Well, on behalf of everyone, I want to thank you, Phil, for being on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you and learning about, again, your journey and your books. And I'd love to have you come back, talk about the common sense, how to text or reach. And I encourage everybody to go check out this website, BlamingJeffreyWriter.com. Google him and check out the books. It's definitely very, very interesting. And you got my blood pressure up there when you started mentioning the bullying part and people with PTSD.
Yeah.
So that's something new to me, and I'm surprised that goes on, but I'm glad you opened my eyes to it. I know there's a lot of people out there suffering from this, and if it opened their eyes as well, whether they're being bullied or they're bullying, then they need to stop that. So thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's quite a pleasure.
Thank you. We have a very beautiful night and the rest of the week.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Here's Michelle Murray with her inspirational song, It Won't Be If, But When.
Won't be if, but when. I know where I've been, I know where I'm going. It's a winding road, but I know that what will be in front of me. I'll handle every turn. Shake the dawn breaks, I'll go with my own.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
At Taylor Gifts, we do customized monogramming and embroidery. We can monogram anything from a simple one name on a bib for a baby to a customized logo on a company shirt. We can make gifts for your wedding entourage and gifts for your friends. Label your children's items for school and put names on jerseys for sports. If you have items of your own you want them monogrammed and embroidered, we can do that. Tailor Gifts are sewn with high-quality thread on a professional embroidery machine. So go to the website www.tailorgifts.net, call 251-391-4354, email sales@tailorgifts.net, visit us at ETSY, and Facebook us. We are ready for your orders.
Welcome to WROM, Realms of Music Radio and Social Network. We support independent artists and talk shows, hosting a large discussion forum and an artist gallery. We also have a large social network combining the best of Facebook and MySpace into one. So make sure you submit your music to us and create a profile to promote yourself today. That's realmsofmusic.com, the best of music radio.
The Ghost Tales Television Network, GTN. GTN is designed to give the paranormal TV and filmmaking community the opportunity to showcase their talents and creations. If you believe you have what it takes to create your very own TV show and or short film and you would like the opportunity to showcase your creations, you may contact us at ghosttalestv@gmail.com or call 901-377-7166 for more details. Make sure you visit ghosttalestv.com. GTN, America's Paranormal Superstation.
Jackalope 105 FM on jackaloperadio.com. Your alternative to the grind of internet and FM radio. When we say diversity in programming, we mean it. Lots of stations brag, throw out a hype, and pad their numbers. Well, we don't. Accept no limitations. When you truly want awesome 24-hour radio, tune in to Jackalope and rock your routine. Jackalope 105 FM on jackaloperadio.com. Thank you for listening to the show. I'm your host, Bryan Lee Whatley. I hope you have an amazing weekend, and I look forward to seeing you next time when another story begins. Until then, love and light.